This is a very serious topic you have brought to light today. The world situation is in great flux, and it is in a temporary hold, a hold which will not last. I have spoken previously about Great Britain, and I have said, as in all places where the indigenous people reside, they do not want to feel that their ancestry, their culture, their life is overridden by others. Just as the Tibetans did not want the Chinese to override their society and displace them from their homes, just as the American Indians did not want the whites to override their continent, their tribal lands, and take their wealth from them. For they had their own form of wealth. The Indians, before the settlers, and the Tibetans had their own form of wealth before the Chinese, and their wealth has been stripped from them, and their country and their lands taken. What happened in the United States, in North America, some 200-300 years ago, is not unlike the situation today. It is different, but there are parallels. For the peoples who resided in the Americas were happy with their lives. They had their tribes, they had their ways, they had their own wealth. Then comes the migration of foreign people with entirely different ways, different gods, different worship, different values, who invaded their lands and made their own place in those lands. And as that place grew and their populations grew, there was little room for those indigenous people who were there before them and their culture. And so they were routed out, pushed away from their native lands to reservations, to places they could be. So when one culture, one way of life, one people from one area of the world migrate to another area of the world and displace the indigenous people of that area, naturally tension arises. Whether that displacement involves a war to acquire the lands or simply a large migration of people that is permitted, whether the tribes in the Americas that welcomed the settlers and the tribes that fought the settlers ended up the same. Did they not? They both were overrun eventually and displaced, and their societies and their wealth of land taken. And even those that welcomed the settlers at first into the Americas, when they saw what they had brought, then they began to try to defend themselves because they realized they would be overrun by these migrating people. But they could not defend themselves. And they could not stop the migration. And they started wars, but they were too weak. And the migration from Europe, where there was so much religious persecution and turmoil, plagues, and so on, there were people who wanted desperately to leave Europe. So there were ships, there were people, and they came, and they came, and they came. And those indigenous people in the Americas could not stop those people driven from their homes by troubles in their own lands, who came to find new homes in the Americas, brought their problems, their culture, their difficulties, and many of these were not the best from Europe, were they not? They were some prisoners, people unwanted. They came to the Americas, established their own colonies, their own cultures. And pretty soon, even those tribes that had invited them in were in the way of their expansion. The tribes in America did not fare well in the end with that migration pattern. They did not migrate. They were forced to different lands. They held as best they could. They hold today as best they can to their culture, to their pride, to the lands they have been given, which were the unwanted lands of the new people who came and took their lands, their lush lands. Do you think the Indians of the San Francisco Bay Area, where there was a great population, wanted to leave their lush, comfortable lands with easy climate? Those tribes, most were completely destroyed. Some managed to be relocated, but their lush land was taken by the migration of others. The most recent of these migrations was the Chinese to Tibet. China needed to take this land. Now, they took it in a war, but it was not the war that was the downfall of Tibet. It was the migration of one people, one culture, into the lands of another, taking their lands. Many countries have had wars, but yet they remain because they have not been the victims of migrations. It is the migration which destroys the people because their culture is taken away, their lands are consumed by others, and they lose their rights to their homeland. So this is a situation in different migrations that have occurred. Now we see different circumstances in the world causing again the dislocation of certain peoples and the migration of those people. First, the numbers are smaller, then they get larger. This is the pattern of the migrations of peoples. When there is a driving force causing those migrations. The poverty, the disrupted politics and religious persecution of Europe caused the migration to the Americas. Where people were promised land they could not have in Europe. Promised religious freedoms they could not have in Europe. They wanted to leave. They ventured a frightening adventure across the seas, a hardship where many died, to that have that promise of wealth and land. Wealth meaning land. That was the wealth of the day. If you could have the land, you can have your farm, you can build your family, you can have your religious freedom. So they took the land of others. There was a forced clash of culture. Today, the climate in the world is at threat and changing. And so many parts of the world are becoming economically strained, and the physical hardship of living there is becoming too much because the lands are drying up in the heat, and you will soon find shorelands disappearing, islands disappearing, as well as increased heat and dryness and water shortages. In the face of the arising climate shifts, which create strain on the environment and the people, you find the rise of political upheaval, tensions, violence, and general society disruption. And with this, the gangs, the jihads, the groupings of people with extreme ideologies. As situations become more extreme, people become more desperate, and these things flourish. So that can already be seen in Africa and Asia. And it can be seen, and it will become known, that the amount of climate damage in certain areas is more than people have thought. The studies have not been as meticulous as needed. The studies of the relationship between the societies and the peoples have not been as thorough as needed, and their climate. But in the world today, the results are becoming obvious. Poverty, violence, political upheaval, lands that are less productive or cease to produce at all, and food and water shortages. These begin to drive people. Some fleeing political unrest and violence, some fleeing religious persecution, some fleeing dried lands and starvation. People begin to move in large and larger numbers as the situation in the world continues to worsen, and the rate will be much faster than has been expected. You will see greater and greater movements of people. As to what will happen with those movements, it depends upon the choices people make. To ascribe moral values to those choices is difficult. Were the Indians who fought less moral than the Indians who let the settlers into their lands? There are no good solutions when there are more people and less land, less water, and less food. And who is moral and who is not becomes a question. There are those who would build walls and fences and see those outside their own country with no compassion. There are those who would with compassion try to accommodate the poor, the hungry, the suffering. Try to help relieve the suffering. Will those who take this compassionate way be overrun? Will those who build walls merely find that enough people pushing on a wall will crumble it, and then the mass flows in? In this type of situation, the struggle for survival can become paramount. The need for order becomes essential. A Kshatriyan society will develop. To regulate and order the situation. Their ways may seem harsh, in order to save what can be saved. The world must unite to face this problem. It cannot be country against country, each making their own choice. That will do for now, but this situation is going to quickly escalate. It will not remain a trickle. It will not remain a small problem. It will not remain, can you accommodate X number of immigrants, Y number of immigrants, Z number of immigrants. It will exceed all bounds. And it may not simply be immigrants from one country to one country, but maybe from one state to one state, from one city to one city. What will happen to Miami? What will happen to Arizona? Difficult times lie ahead, times that will necessitate change. An orderly rule not by one country, or can one country solve this global problem? The world must unite, a federation of countries, a global federation to handle the problems of pollution and the destruction of the planet, the very threatening of human life on this planet, and the consequences that will soon be upon humanity of their actions. Now you can begin to see a little way into the future simply by projecting. What I am saying is nothing you cannot observe yourself. 20 years ago, when people said a difficult time is coming, no one understood why or what that would look like. Now it can be seen why and what it will look like. There was a time I said much could be avoided. That time has passed. Now, what will happen is obvious to all. But no one wants to recognize the seriousness of the problem, wants to admit the seriousness as they look forward into the future, or is desperate enough yet to insist on the solutions, which can be harsh. Countries are trying to act unilaterally. Some, like the Indians who welcomed the settlers, trying to understand these poor, forgotten people far from their own homeland, who come off of ships hungry and starving. Try to help them. Some see them as invaders, want to keep them out. Either way, it didn't matter, did it? In the end, it was the same result. Today's solutions lie in the federation of world leaders and governments to unite to make strict laws to reverse the damage and to deal with the consequences of what has happened. That is the path to survival of the human race. And I believe that the survival instincts of people will bring them to those solutions. Otherwise, they will perish altogether. You see, even now, the call of people, the alarm they feel. But 5, 10, 15 years from now, that alarm will be a screaming, desperate need. So the rise of dictators is a natural phenomenon to occur in such unstable times, an initial attempt to deal with the problem. The rise of conservative values, fear of being overrun, fear of the indigenous people of losing their lands, their culture, their place. Neither conservatism nor liberalism, a compassionate attitude, trying to welcome the needy and the poor. Neither one of these will be able to solve this problem. The solution lies instead in peoples around the world reaching out to each other for a common solution. And it may be harsh. And people may die. You cannot make a world with a shrinking water and shrinking land that can produce food, feed more and more and more. But humanity can survive and can save the planet and will. But first, it must recognize the seriousness of the situation, and that has yet to come. Now, people are trying one thing, trying another, not willing to admit to themselves how serious it is, that it is more than they can handle, more than their nation can handle, more than their dictator can handle, more than their government can cope with. They begin to see, so they try to come together for some moderate changes in the society. But that will not be enough. People will soon figure this out as the situation becomes more and more upset. Yet I say, the bright dawn of a rising consciousness is occurring simultaneously. People are awakening from darkness into spiritual light, from the darkness of materialism, which has ultimately caused this current situation. They awaken to the spiritual light. There is a Shudra revolution in process, and it will lead to a Kshatriya society. The Kshatriyans will rule to save the earth and the peoples and living beings upon it as much as they can, and to begin afresh. As the earth slowly heals. All right, are there any questions?
Can you say something?
There seem to be questions. All right, one at a time.
Go ahead, please.
Okay. Is this climate change only man-made, or are there maybe some astronomical reasons for that also? I have read that some hundreds years ago a similar situation happened here, but we were much less people that time.
It's a very good point. The earth has indeed gone through different changes. But without the greed of human beings causing harm to the planet, exploiting its resources and creating pollution in their ignorance, these changes would not be triggered at this time. Perhaps in 500,000 years, but not now. It is human intervention, human abuse of the planet, which is causing the extinctions and which is causing the cycle of change of climate. The world is a fragile ecosystem, and if you alter something, you can cause a chain reaction that will change many things. And it can happen very quickly. And that is the situation today. So yes, the planet does go through these changes. What triggers it may vary. If, such as happened in the early times of the planet, when the land was still very unstable, there are many, many great volcanic explosions. This also can trigger something. But the dramatic change of today is triggered by the actions of people. The changes in the oceans are not due to natural causes. They are due to human actions. The changes to the atmosphere are due to human actions. The changes in the water are due to human use. But what the earth will do in the chain reaction that follows is due to the natural interactive process of earthly change, reaction, and response. So when you say, has the earth had these reactions and responses previously? I would say yes. But they do not occur without reason. Those reasons have been geological in the past. The reason today is in the evolutionary process of the planet and the evolutionary stage of the development of consciousness on the planet, which has taken the form that we call human beings. I have spoken before that humans, as all beings, are but the children of the earth. They are her very form in their physical beings, changing and developing greater and greater consciousness. So, evolution of consciousness is triggering this. Yes. The child is old enough to play with fire, but not to know what it does, or that they can be burnt by it. All right?
Yes, I wonder if this has happened or is happening in many other planets in this universe, or what are, how have they come out?
Consciousness is developing. It will continue to develop. And as it does, the greed, self-centeredness, and ego orientation of individualism gets consumed in the collective body. For the earth is one being, and its children are part of it. Awakening of consciousness is the evolutionary change needed to bring the human being beyond this stage, which is destructive. Child grows, becomes more intelligent. It doesn't do these stupid actions. Mind grows in magnitude. Human beings are growing, connecting. They are evolving. But right now, they are at a critical turning point. Evolve or die. All right?
Okay.
Acharya Govinda, you had a question.
Would you like to talk about some of the very difficult and hard solutions that we may have to make, bring forward?
The first one, and the most important, is that the leaders of the world, the different countries, will have to humble themselves and recognize that they alone cannot solve their own problem, and that they must work to solve the problem. And that even though they may have the strongest dictator who will build walls of iron, they cannot solve their problem. And behind the walls, their own people will starve. The first solution is to recognize the interwoven, interconnected nature of human life and life on the planet. And that only by working in coordinated cooperation can a solution be found. Then, in that coordinated cooperation, strict laws with harsh penalties be imposed and enforced by a collective governing body, so that no nation can choose to simply disregard. They will be struck down. No nation can choose to bend it, or they will be policed by an international policing squad. They will be bound together in a federation that is strong, because it must be strong for humanity to survive. It will start weak and grow stronger. Those who don't want to participate will find themselves forced into participation eventually. When people are desperate and recognize that the actions of another are going to cause their own demise, they will act to stop that other. They will apply whatever pressure is needed. And when all have united in a common cause, strict regulations to reverse the climate dissipation, and not only to let nature take its course, for if nature takes its course, the earth will become uninhabitable. Human beings, as they have worked to trigger this chain reaction, must work to stop the chain reaction. They will have to be inventive collectively, and they will have to put all their resources to working with each other to build solar plants and atmosphere clearing and water purification. These are the ways of the future. Technologies unknown today will be developed. Strict guidelines on birth control will be developed. Strict and controlled patterns of migration and of dealing with lands that are becoming uninhabitable will be developed. Without this, chaos will reign. Whole countries and continents will be overrun to everyone's demise. An entire breakdown of law and chaos will dominate. Violence will become common. Until the rule of the Kshatriyas can secure the planet. The degree to which either occurs remains open and in the hands of human beings. The need for survival will most assuredly cause change, innovation. But the time is near. The values of Prout will be implemented. It is a certainty. But these things will not come because people have a good intention and good ideas and they want to do it. they will come out of desperation. Do you see?
Yes.
Baba, you have said that women will have a very big role in the coming changes. So will there be Katrian type of women? What shall we? Not motherly type, but Katrian.
Who are the greatest warriors? Have you ever seen a mother defend her children?
All right.
Women are great warriors. Don't ever think they are not. And they are in a Kshatriyan society. They can be great leaders, great warriors. It is women and their need to survive and have their offspring survive who will thrust the world into change. Women leaders will abound in society. It is a changing time. Men and women will both be leading together as equals. But women will make the demand. Women will strike forward. Women will rise to power throughout the world. They are already rising, but that will increase. Women know about survival. Men may want to be brave and fight to the death. Women want their children alive. All right? All right?
Yes. Yes.
All right.
All right. Very good, very good.